morning or good afternoon, I have to say. This is Hannah Klein. Welcome to Hannah Klein's Time, my podcast. So, as I just posted, today's guest is Rabbi Avi Schwartz. He has a very interesting background, including his being an Israeli police officer. But anyway, before judging him, please listen to his story and our discussion. So, good evening in Israel.
Thank you.
Yeah, I
And what
always
time?
have to, like just crumble in my head, what time it is now, and it's
Sure.
an evening in Israel.
Yeah. Six exactly 6:11. Interesting,
Yeah,
by the way. We're
yeah.
starting 6:11. You know why it's interesting? Because in Torah it's
Mm-hmm,
called gematria. Every single word in Hebrew has a certain number, and the
mm-hmm.
word 6:11 comes to the gematria of the word Torah itself, Torah. So that we're starting at 6:11. It's interesting that a very spacious number. The same token, by the way, President Truman of the United States recognized Israel at 6:11 p.m.
Wow,
Yeah, interesting.
fascinating. I know I have done podcasting with a retired lawyer called Leonard Grantstein. He
Mhm.
wrote he lobbied for Israel to be recognized with the capital in Jerusalem.
Mm.
He worked very hard for it. He's Jewish, of course, but he's a very peaceful person. He sent me the book, a copy, and
Mm.
that was very special. He was talking about how President Trump signed,
Mm.
yeah, recognize the capital as Jerusalem. So
Mhm.
that was
Yeah,
very special to me. He signed,
right.
and the
Beautiful.
yeah, I mean he signed. He recognized it in actually uh, in a room where President Truman's painting was,
Wow.
and so forth and forth. So yeah, I believe that, to Israeli people, I guess that, President Truman is very special, So
Mhm.
yeah, I guess that, it's something.
Yes, it
It
is.
should mean something.
It does. It does.
Yeah. But anyway, thank you for coming, to my podcast on such a haste, it just made you hurry.
Thank you. So it's an honor and pleasure.
Oh, it's my honor and pleasure too. And I'm very pleased that you're open to discussing various topics, as I requested. Which is very important for me to some extent, not just, for Israel, but just for, I guess, for, what it means to be a nation, to Japan or the Japanese listeners. I guess that, it's important for the Japanese people to understand what how Japanese people should react to be a Japanese. I mean,
Mhm.
it's
Mhm.
very important. So I mean, I hope that there are a lot of listeners for some reason. Even though it's in English, there are a lot of listeners from Japan. So that so I hope that the topic is relevant to the Japanese people as well. So I mean, and also, I hope that, the Japanese people are able to understand the topics discuss topics on Israel, relevant to themselves, not just, when they hear on the news, which is just somewhere else to them.
Yeah,
I hope that, it's something that matters to them as well.
right, right.
So, so first of all, I know about your background, but could you explain or just introduce your background a little from your words?
Sure, definitely. I was born in Israel. I'm fourth generation Israeli. That means that my father, my grandfather, great grandfather, all are born in Israel, from Israel, and also grandparents from in terms of grandmother and so great grandmother as well. I myself was born in the south, in Beersheba, it's in the south,
Oh,
and my
really?
father and yes, my
Oh.
father and grandfather in Jerusalem, and we're also from the tribe of Levi. People know there are 12 tribes. 10 tribes have been missing now, basically 207 years, 2,700 years
Mhm.
since the first Jewish kingdom was conquered. Even before that,
Mhm.
there was the northern Israel and there was the southern Israel, northern kingdom of Israel and the southern kingdom of Israel. The northern kingdom had 10 tribes, and the southern kingdom had 2 tribes. The northern kingdom was conquered basically for 2,700 years ago, and Sennacherib, who was a great conqueror, a terrible man as well, but
Mhm.
a brilliant political genius when it came to controlling people. He made transfer of nations. So
Mhm.
he took out 10 tribes out of Israel and put them in different parts of the world. Meanwhile, he brought other people into Israel. And those are the people who came into this, later on became the Samaritans, the Good Samaritans. Now, in terms of, I said before, I'm a Levi. I come from the tribe of Levi. This has been passed down since Levi, the son of Jacob, was first born. This goes from generation to generation.
Mhm.
So it's a very proud, very important heritage that we have. Back in temple times, we would serve in the temple, would help the priests called the Kohanim, who also come from the tribe of Levi. The
Mhm.
Kohanim are a subsection of the Levites, of the Levite tribe. And to this day, we still have special tasks and so forth, not per se in terms of the temple, because the temple has not been rebuilt in 2,000 years. But the mission of the Levite tribe is to teach Torah and so forth, to teach goodness and love and all the aspects of Torah philosophy and Jewish ways. My father is a great Israeli war hero from the War of Independence. He belonged to a thing called a group called the Palmach. Palmach was spirit forces. They were the elite force of Dagenah. Now, before the state was created, there was basically in the land of Israel,
Mhm.
that was called Palestine. It
Mhm.
wasn't called Palestine with the Palestinians. It was called Palestine
Yeah.
because a emperor called Hadrian in the
Mhm.
year 135, 139 CE. Now, why we say CE? As a Jewish person, Jewish man, or Jewish woman, we don't talk about Jesus or anything else. We say CE because Common Era. We say BCE before the Common Era. The Common Era basically when later on became Western Europe became more Christian. So we
Oh.
call it the Common Era. So, but the year 139 CE, after there was a great rebellion here in Israel,
Mhm.
and by a great military leader named Bar Kokhba. Unfortunately, we had lost the war to the Romans,
Mhm.
and so the Romans at that time destroyed even more of our people. In fact, they did that earlier, but 50, 60 years earlier, in the year 70, when they destroyed the Holy Temple, the Second Holy Temple.
Mhm.
And so what happened was then the Jews went into exile. I'll get to a little bit more about my background in a second, but it's very important about the word Palestine.
Mhm.
So Hadrian, at that moment, seeing the incredible connection that we have to the land of Israel, wanted to cut the connection between the Jewish people and the land of Israel. So he did a very smart political move. He called it Palestine. He named it Palestine not after the inhabitants who were living in the land of Israel at that time, because
Mhm.
the Palestine was named after the Philistines. The Philistines were the ancient enemies of the Jewish people. The Philistines came from
Oh.
Cyprus. They came from Cyprus, and the Philistine means Philistine means invader. So they
Mm.
had come into the area, and they had lived where you won't believe it, in Gaza, in Gaza, Ashdod, in that area. So to this day, we have ancient relics and cemeteries of the Philistines. You can look up and Google yourself for your
Mm.
audience. And so the Philistines were the ones who were the big enemies of King David and the King Saul. You can read that in the Bible. With the Christians would call the Old Testament, we call the Tanakh the Bible. It's in the book
Mm.
of Psalms, the book of Judges, and the book of Samuel 1, Samuel 2, Kings, and so forth. And there you'll see that the Philistines were always giving problems to the Jewish people. But what happened was, by the time Bar Kokhba had made his rebellion against Rome
Mm.
to reestablish our independence again,
Mm.
because before we had our own nation state. We had one during the first time King Saul and King David. That lasted for hundreds of years, and about 410 years. And then we had you can look before 10 and 420. You can look at it in Google to be sure which one. The second one, that's in terms of the Holy Temple. The second Holy Temple was lasted about also 410 years about.
Mm.
And we had a state under the Maccabees. The Maccabees had won the independence from the Greek Syrians. The famous holiday Hanukkah, when you see the menorah, the eight lights of Hanukkah, that's to commemorate the great victory.
Yes. Yeah.
So that lasted about 250 years, that state. Nobody, by the way, knows, in the year 619, there's also another Jewish state. Lasted about 10 years. And that was 10, 15 years, and then it was defeated in war. Anyhow, the point is, going back to the question, I'm sorry to take you on such a circle, but Palestine was given by Hadrian to make sure the connection between Jewish people and the land of Israel would be cut. So he named it after the Philistines because, as I mentioned before, a political act of brilliance. The Philistines were no longer alive anymore. They had disappeared for 700 years from history.
Mm.
Because of that very important reality, he didn't fear that by calling it Palestine, it would encourage the people living in his land of Israel to make a rebellion against him. There were two groups living in the land of Israel at that time. There were the Jewish people and there were Samaritans. That's coming from the New Testament. It says the Good Samaritan. So the Samaritans people were at odds. But he didn't call it Samaria, as the Samaritans, because he knew if he called it Samaritans, he'd be giving legitimacy to the people living there. The same way, let's say, in modern politics. If, let's say, you have two nations or two peoples living in a perfect example, Putin right now, right? Putin were to recognize the other ethnic group in Ukraine, and then say he got rid of the Ukrainians, but he called the other ethnic group, let's say, Uzbekistan or something like that, then they would be recognizing their political legitimacy. So what did Hadrian do? He got rid of all political acceptance or legitimacy by naming it Palestine. And it remained for the last 2,000 years called Palestine.
Wow.
So my father, in fact, look at his birth certificate, it says Palestinian. My grandfather too. So I'm a son of a Palestinian. So anybody who was born before 1948 was a Palestinian, Jewish Palestinian, Christian Palestinian, and it had nothing to do with the Palestinian people. It's just named Palestine after Hadrian. Now, so going back to my father and we were two groups in my family, belonged to the right wing, left wing, and the right wing, left wing in those days were very pro-national in terms of creating a Jewish state. They hadn't been a Jewish state in 2,000 years. My father was a great warrior. Captured parts of Western Jerusalem. Captured, in fact, he was the first Jewish person in 1,877 years to capture the temple, the Hatzion, which is across overseeing the Temple Mount. So if you go, it's called next to Zion's Gate. Look in the map. He's also at the age of 19 years old. He and 21 of his Palmachnik warriors saved 1,700 Jewish men and children from the Jordanian onslaught that was in the old city. So a very special man. My mother also was a woman who was born in America. She came to Israel in 1951, a great patriot to the Jewish nation and a great Zionist and so forth. So, and that's a little about me. Now, in terms also, I myself have a master's in political science. I was doing a PhD in political science with Professor Massimiliano, a great social philosopher from Poland. I have a rabbi, a smicha on ordination by Rabbi Avi Feinstein from the great yeshiva in Lower East Side called Masjid Jerusalem. I myself also was a filmmaker. My movies on Tubi, Red Corral. My movies have been, thank God, have been accepted in Rotten Tomatoes. It's a movie called The Quest, Get Back Your Ex. It's about redemption. It's about changing your life. And it's very apropos to Zionism. So if you don't mind, but at the moment, if I talk about Zionism.
Oh, sure, sure. Yeah, I mean, I would like to post about it too on,
Yeah.
on my podcast, introduction anyway. So,
So for 1 second, if you just because it's related to that, the idea is because what happens is people think, what is Zionism all about? What is in there? So the word Zion itself, if you were to even make, let's say, a Google search or a ChatGPT search, you see the word Zion is written about 150 times in the Jewish Bible, and
Mm,
it's written about 7 times in the New Testament, and not one time in the whole Quran, not at all. So the Quran doesn't even talk about Zion, and Zion is the Hebrew word for Zionism. The same token, the Quran does acknowledge that it's called the children of Israel, Bnei Israel, that mentions dozens of times that the land of Israel belongs to the Jewish people. In fact, if you look in the Surah, in Matthew 5, 20, 21, it says, all my people enter the Holy Land, which Allah has assigned to you. The Quran also acknowledges that God gave the Holy Land to the children of Israel. So the idea of when you hear the word Zionism, it's about the connection that we, the Jewish people, have to the land of Israel. It's been in our prayers for thousands of years. We always talk about that. In fact, Joshua, the second leader after Moses, wrote a special prayer that we say after eating about the connection to the land of Israel, to Zion, and so forth. King Solomon wrote as well. In a simple note, basically, what is Zionism? It is the spiritual, emotional, psychological, intellectual, and also the political return of the Jewish people to the land of Israel. And if you look yourself, you'll see that the Jewish people have always been living in the land of Israel for over 3,300 years. The difference is in terms of having a state. So we lost our state about 2 years ago. We were able to again to make it in the year 619 for about 10, 15 years. We lost that. And in terms of an actual state again, that was made in 1948. So Zionism basically is the return of the Jewish people to the ancestral, but not just ancestral, but their current homeland, because the Jews never left. We've always been either majority or minority. We were minority when invaders came in, like the Muslim conquests and other crusades and so forth, came in, us out from our land, or basically exiled many of us from the land. But we were always there. So people have to have this distinction. There is Zionism as a spiritual force, as the metaphysical aspect, the religious aspect, the life philosophy, the soul, and then there's modern Zionism, which is the political movement that was created by the great writer and thinker Theodor Herzl in the 1890s. Dr. Theodor Herzl said a very simple thing, said, let's go back home and create a state again. And that was radical. It was so radical because why? We had a state in terms of an actual state, even though it had for 15 years, within 2 years, but an actual state again bringing and creating a nation state. And that was very new. Because one has to also remember, 19th century, there was nationalism. Nationalism took over Europe. The French want to have a French state, and the English want an English state, and so forth, and Spanish and so forth. So the Jews said, if everyone else is having a state, we should also have a state, especially since we're probably one of the oldest nations in the world, like the Japanese. Japanese are very, very ancient people, and the people from India are very ancient people. So, and the Iranians, very ancient people.
Yes. Well, see, I have discussed, Zionism with Dr. Annette Wilf. She discusses, not professionally, but, I discussed Zionism with her. She was talking about being secular, Israel being a more secular nation, but, more importantly, in my opinion, this is my opinion as a Japanese, just, taking away the religious part of, Zionism, which is the important, essence of a nation, itself
Mhm.
is Zionism, I think, in my opinion, you know, even though I guess that, I have to say, that, Japan is not completely, a nation without religion. It has Shintoism, it became a religion and, officially, after World War II, it was officially recognized as a religion by GHQ. But anyways, it has always been a religion. And at some point to the Japanese people, I think, throughout people's lives. And at the same time, you know, I don't believe that, well, it was just a matter of fact that Japan was hard to invade, to be invaded, I have to say, by China, for example, or, Korean Peninsula, or just, because it was an island, unlike Israel. So, I mean, it was just like geologically fortunate at some point, but it, you know, when we think of why the Jewish state is important, I think that the Japanese people should consider why Japan is important for the Japanese people, you know. I mean,
Sure.
if well, suppose the Japanese had lost, a nation like the Jewish people. I'm not sure what's going to happen really now, because probably the Japanese would want a nation. And so I do, like I have seen, comments on by so-called pro-Hamas, protesters in Japan, calling Zionists evil, blah blah blah, all these things. But in
Hmm.
my opinion, I think that it's partly, sadly, because of the lack of knowledge of themselves. And uh, I have to say that it's a part of anti-Semitism,
Hmm.
sadly. It's very sad because, you know, um, I really hope that, it's my hope, but I just hope that, uh, you know, the Japanese, has accepted, for example, in 700s, before Korean refugees from Korean Peninsula. So, I would, hope that, there w wouldn't have such discriminations against people, but there is actually such, discrimination right now, especially against the Jewish people. And so it's very sad, and I just I don't have words, but I don't I just don't have really words against people who want to deny, especially October 7th. And
Hmm.
and the sad part is that the Japanese media have been referring to Al Jazeera countless times every day. So I would not completely blame the Japanese people, but in the end, they will be judged, in my opinion.
Hmm.
at the same time. So it's not just the media. The media will irresponsibly, report anything, just they did during the World War II. But in the end, they will be judged. The Japanese will be judged as Japanese for what they did. And so I will not say, like, for example, I see the pro-Hamas protests. You were doing protests for in New York, for example, but I mean, you did not say anything aggressive. I mean, and you were saying something very peaceful, and so I really am shocked, like those refugees, claiming, like Jews don't have right to exist, like all these things,
Right, right,
And in
right.
the end, from the start of the October 7th, I assumed that they would start to say it because that's how it is all the time. But,
Hmm.
it's now alarming level. And
Right.
I don't have words really. And, regarding Zionism, like, I just don't have words on what people write on social media because it's obviously because of what they don't know about. And I just I really yeah I'm just I just feel sometimes feel like shocking, like just I just feel like crying sometimes, you know
Yes, I hear.
because
Yeah,
it's
sure.
so bad.
Right. It's true. It's very true. I look. Let me say it this way.
Mhm,
I expected after October 7th, I
mhm,
expected that when if Israel retaliated, then of course we would have anti-Semitism. What I didn't expect, I expected and didn't expect it that the people that the BDS movement had so brainwashed people that they made it sure that they legitimized even the killings and the raping of innocent people. That was something that was a little that had taken me aback. Because let's say this way, if Israel retaliates, then of course there's going to be anti-Semitism. But
mhm,
in this case, October 7th was basically where Israel was attacked savagely. And and the thing is this, people have to understand that when the Muslim conquests happen and so forth over the years, right? It was always a way, it's not just Muslim conquest, but only in war, that people come in and they attack and they massacre and so forth. That is the way of war. That's what the Muslims did. That's what the Hamas did. And this has
mhm,
always been part of Middle East culture.
mhm,
Now, but we're not living in the 14th century.
mhm,
We're living in the 21st century.
mhm,
If people want to be honest with themselves, right? And then, of course, if the world wants to be honest with themselves, then they have to admit that even if we say in Japan, what did Japan do to Manchuria, and what China did to the Koreans, and so forth in Asia. And if people want to go, what the Muslims did to the why is most of the world speaking Arabic? If Arabic comes from Saudi Arabia, if Arabic comes from Arabia, why are most people Iranians speaking Arabic? It makes sense to you?
mhm,
Why people speaking English if English comes from England?
mhm,
Why many people speaking French if French comes from France? And why people speaking in Latin America Spanish? It comes from Spain. And yet nobody speaks Hebrew except the Jewish people. What's my point? My point is this way. The world has been a world whereby it's been an act of imperialism, be it the Chinese imperialism,
mhm,
Japanese imperialism, Indian imperialism, or, be it the French imperialism, English imperialism, Spanish imperialism. The fact that the only people in the world speak Hebrew, that means the Jewish people never went and did the conquering of other nations, like
mhm,
the other nations of the world have done. Yes, there was when we came back to the land of Israel after the Exodus, and there was nations there. But but if you look in historically, we had either had fought with the other nations or lived with the other nations, so forth, in the land of Israel. But we didn't do what other nations have done, whereby they conquered and then take over the land and make you speak their language. So in terms of hypocrisy, let's be honest now. Let's be honest and let the world really see for itself. If the people are speaking Spanish in Latin America, that means Spanish invaders came from Spain, from the old world to New World, conquered the indigenous people, raped them, killed them, massacred them, and then taught them Christianity, then taught them Spanish. And the same with the French. So we have French in North America and Quebec and so forth. The same way you have Chinese in different Chinese in different aspects of Asia and so forth. And also there was wars. Let's say those wars themselves in Japan between different groups and so forth, right? Okay. So we cannot be hypocritical. But the hypocrisy is when only the Jewish people are picked out. So why are the Jewish people picked out from all the groups in the world? So first of all, let's see the insanity here. There are 8 billion non-Jewish people in the world, 8 billion people in the world, 8 billion people in the world. I was once speaking to someone from China, and he said, "You Jewish people, you control everything." Nice anti-Semitism, very nice. I said, "Really? Okay, let's Google right now." And I said to him, "Let's Google right now and see how many Jews are in the whole world." And we Googled together. He said, "What? 14 million? That's what you are, 14 million?" This is back in the year 2009. 14 million, 15 million, can't be. We Chinese are 2 billion people, he says to me. He's from China. I'm speaking type of accent. We're bigger than you. I said, interesting. So you're 2 billion people. We're 14 to 15 million people. That's nothing. And you say we control the world? Same thing over here. There are 8 billion people. Out of the 8 billion people, maybe there's 15 million Jewish people in the whole world. Maybe 15 million, right? So that means basically 0.02% of the world population, basically. And people can calculate maybe more by the percentage, but you can see it's a very, very small percent, less than 1%. And yet, we're not allowed to have our own country. And yet, we're not allowed to have our own. And yet, we're not allowed to protect our women and so forth. And yet, we can't save our children. Not allowed. But if the Jews die or get killed in the Holocaust, that's okay. See the hypocrisy here? Yeah. That's the hypocrisy. So if the Japanese want to be serious about being just and so forth, let's look at it. So let's understand the anti-Semitism is so great. Why is it people are basically and not Zionist? It has to do, first of all, with this very simple point. It's Islam and Christianity against Judaism. So that was simple. If you'll see carefully that majority of nations where there was no Christianity and there's no Islam and Jews lived there was never anti-Semitism. For example, India. How much anti-Semitism was in India? Very little. Because why?
Yeah, I'm actually surprised that, there are a lot of I have to say, like, for example, Iraqi Jews, who fled, India.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And in fact, we were living in India for thousands of years. And the reason why is very simple. If I can give an analogy. We have a store. If you have a store and you're successful at it, and then you come along and you want to build your own store, very similar to my store. You have several ways to market yourself. Either you can be very good in your product, or you can be average, or you can demonize, you can make my product look bad, right? You can say my product is a bad product and so forth. The product that came after Judaism was Christianity. And Christianity wanted to say they are the new monotheism, the new idea of having of God and ethics and so forth. And Judaism is passé, come to us. And you'll see later on, that's when in the centuries following, The Christian writers of the church became anti-Semitic because the Jews would not bow down and wouldn't accept Christianity. Then later on, about in the year 614, a little later on, then Islam came along. And Islam said, a new store in the block. And we don't want not Judaism and not Christianity to be any more the main store. But they took over. And so they badmouth both Judaism and also Christianity. Very simple. That's human nature. Now, when you see Al Jazeera, is this a Japanese network? No, it's an Arab network by Qatar. Okay, so it's already based upon Islamic fundamentalism. And from Islamic fundamentalism will already tell you that Jews are not allowed to have a state. Because why? According to Islam, once the Muslims conquer a land, it belongs to them. It's called the Caliphate. That's a come they want to return to the Caliphate. That's a come Turkey's always talking about the Caliphate. No one talks about the fact that Turkey had made a genocide on Armenia. 1.5 million Armenians were massacred over 100 years ago. No one mentions that. That was put away under the rug. Right? Now, by the way, Hitler himself had learned from that genocide. He said, no one cares about that genocide, so they won't care about my genocide when again do the Jew against the Jewish people. Okay, because he sees no one cares any more. So if you think about it, does anybody care about the genocide that happened in Rwanda? Anybody care about the genocide that happened in Pol Pot in Vietnam? Anybody care about the genocide that happened in parts of Asia? No. But for some reason, if the Jews fight back, they go crazy. Does anybody care right now that Boko Haram, there are Muslims right now, as we speak, enslaving girls, raping girls, beheading people in Africa? No. Did people get happened? There's massacres in India by Islamic terrorists? No. But if the Jews fight back, all of a sudden it's terrible. The hypocrisy is great. One, as mentioned before, is the centuries-old anti-Semitism based on the fact of religious animosity, because we are the first nation who mentioned ethical monotheism. And so we don't want to bend, and we don't accept the other outgrowths that came from Judaism, being Christianity and Islam. So we are, so to speak, with a pariah. That's from that point of view. The other point of view, politically is that if from the left or from the right, the Jews are not to have a state. Let me give you an example. The word Nazism comes from two words, National Socialism, right? So, but wait a second. Socialism is left wing, correct?
Yeah.
Nazism right wing. So how could it be together? All of a sudden, left wing and right wing. Very simple. Hitler knew very well how to manipulate people. So he called it National Socialism because he wanted to invigorate the German working man. So he got the German working on his side, but all the time he was manipulating him towards extreme right nationalism to the point that he became the racist. You see what he did? He wanted to kill all the Jews. He tried killing all the gypsies. He massacred left and right other nations. He wanted to make the blacks into slaves. And he massacred 6 million Jews and 5 million non-Jews that were massacred in the death camps. So 11 million people altogether. So the point is, over here, when you have all this together, you have trickery. That's what I mentioned before, Nazism. People are tricked by the media constantly. If I give you an example, I mentioned before, I'm a filmmaker, right? If I take, there's a long shot, there's a close-up. If I right now take a long shot of, let's see, you arguing with your neighbor, right? And I'm seeing you, and you're very passionate. What will I assume as the viewer? Who is the bad person? You or your neighbor? If your neighbor is nice and calm and collected, and you're yelling and screaming, what will I assume? Just from the long shot perspective, I will assume that you're the bad person because you're yelling and screaming and you're raising your hand. Let's assume I dolly in, I zoom in. And now I realize the reason why you're yelling and screaming because your neighbor almost ran down your child. Oh, now I understand why you're screaming now. Now it makes sense. You're justified to scream because your neighbor was your Daniel child.
Yeah.
But I had assumed, because I saw life from a long shot, that
Mm.
you were the wrong person and the other person was the justified person. And how dare you scream at the person being so calm and so forth. Like,
Mm.
okay. So when you're seeing the situation in the Middle East, you're seeing things from a long shot. From perspective of already a very one-sided perspective.
Mm.
You're seeing perspective of Qatar, you're seeing perspective of Hamas, you're seeing perspective of Islamic Jihad, you're seeing from Iran. If
Mm.
people want to be honest and really intellectually honest, then guess what? Let them see the whole picture. Let them see from the side from the Jewish perspective. Let them see inside from the Israeli perspective. Let them see inside from all aspects of the country. Let them come to Israel. Let them come to the Middle East. Let them come to Gaza and live and see and so forth. And then things will change. Because all of a sudden you see a different side. It's
Mm.
like people want to hear only one side. When you hear one side, you're not hearing the story. Because the history is his story, her story, and the story, the real, right? Correct? Now, people, unfortunately, in Japan, are not listening to the whole story. If, for example, um, I could look at Japan. I could
Mm.
say the terrible atrocities Japan did to China. Correct? I could say that. True? Not true? Or I could say, wait a second. What was the reason that this happened? Because, well, maybe Japan was attacked by China years earlier. Interesting. So, to perspective history. Or I could say, wait a second. Isn't it true that the Americans bombed the Hiroshima and Nagasaki with the atomic bombs? Yeah, that's from perspective. The question, why did Truman have to go to such an extent? Because he knew that maybe that the Japanese warrior had had a non-stop allegiance to his nation. He would give everything.
Mm.
So everyone has to be seen from their perspective, the truth until it finally comes out. The great Japanese filmmaker Karawasa, who made the movie Rashomon, right? Back in the 50s, he's talking about a couple. Unfortunately, the woman is attacked by a bandit, and
Mm.
each one is given perspective of reality, and you don't know which is the real truth, right? The
Mhm.
intellectual, person of honesty, tries to find the truth. So your viewers should try to listen and then look at other media and see it not from Al Jazeera only. It's not fair if they want to be really intellectual about it, really honest about the situation. So, but before you mentioned about Zionism. So, what is Zionism basically? I mentioned before, going back home. Now, there's a religious aspect of it and there's a political aspect of it. The
Mm.
political aspect of it began back in the 1890s.
Mm.
So, why is that so important to mention? We've been in the 1870s. People think that Israel was given to the Jewish people because of what happened in the Holocaust. After the Holocaust, 6 million Jews were massacred, and the Arab world was so nice that they let Jews come into the land. Okay, so let's back up for a second.
Mm.
How is it possible
Mm.
that all of a sudden, in 2.5 years, World War I ends in 1945,
Mhm.
and in 2.5 years later, all of a sudden there's a state declared in 1948. It's passed by the UN, and all of a sudden Israel has infrastructure and so forth within 2.5 years. That's interesting, correct?
Mm.
Everybody will, of course, know that's impossible. The reason why, because already in the 1870s, in the 1880s, and 1890s, and so forth, Jewish people were returning back home to the land of Israel. In
Oh,
fact,
yes.
the
Yeah.
The Ottoman Empire allowed the Jews to return back. The Crusades drew the Jews out. The Muslims drew out, but the Ottoman Empire said you can come back home in the 1500s. That's how many Jews came back from where they were located in Spain and so forth, and Sfarad, and they reestablished the cities in Israel, like Tzfat and Tveria and so forth. That's in the 1500s, 1600s. By the 1870s, 1890s, and so forth, there was already a growing movement of
Mhm.
reestablishing the Jewish people in the land of Israel. In fact, if you look carefully if you look, you can Google yourself, you can ChatGPT it, you'll see the amount of space for the people living in the land in terms basically 1 mile for one person for 20 every 27 miles. That's the amount of little people there was in the deserts and so forth, and in the hills. Now, by the time 1945 came about, there was 550,000 Jews living in the land, in the land of Israel, and there's about 1.2 million Arabs. Now, these many Arabs, you can see yourself, you can, from YouTube, people who even Hamas, speak about the fact that he calls out to help his brother in Egypt, al-Suri and Morsi and so forth. He says, we come from Egypt, we come from Libya, we come from Lebanon. The name itself in Arabic, the last name tells you where you originally come from. So many families here, there are some Arabs who live here for hundreds of years, but many Arabs who came in the 1890s, 1900s, when the Jews began to reclaim the land again and rebuild the land, and the economy was beginning to boom. So many Arabs left other Arab countries and came to Israel, to the land of Israel, in order to have a better life. People forget that. No, they forget that. So by 1945, there was, I mentioned before, 550,000 Jewish people. Those who were born in Israel already in 1890s, 1820, 1900 and so forth. My grandfather, who was born in 1895. My father in 1928. So these are indigenous already, if you want people to talk about it that way.
Yeah.
Right? Besides the indigenous were having 3,000 years beforehand. Now, by the time 1945, 1946 comes along, there was already 40 years already in the process, and people themselves will admit, they will say the Balfour Declarations, you'll hear from the Arab world himself, that the Balfour Declaration of 1917 was a bad thing to do. Wait a second. You're giving a contradiction to me. You're saying to me the Holocaust was the reason why there was a Jewish state. But then you said to me 1917 was the Balfour Declaration. So what is it? So they themselves are saying that themselves. There's already a Zionist movement returning back to the land of Israel to reestablish a Jewish presence, either as a nation state or just as a nation within the land, already in the 1890s, in 1900s, 1917. More so. And you
Is
can
that
see
Francesca Albanese's
exactly.
statement?
You can see the thing called San Remo Conference in 1920, 1921. In 1920 and 21, 55 nations, League of Nations, so forth, including Japan, if I believe, recognized that the Jewish people have their indigenous rights to all the land of Israel across both sides of the Jordan River. And they gave both sides of the Jordan River to the Jewish people. That's the 1920s, by 55 nations. Okay, so we were recognized by the world community. Now, what happened was, Churchill was at that time the foreign minister of England, and the Hashemite kingdom had come up from Arabia into the Transjordan, and they began to attack the British. And so the British said, "What do you want to do? We don't want to fight you." They said, "Give us half of the region from the Transjordan." That later turned into Jordan itself in 1946. So that means already that the land that was promised to us, given to us by the world community in 1920, 1921, the San Remo Conference, was stolen from us, was robbed from us. So when you see tiny Israel, that's not what Israel's supposed to be according to the San Remo legislation. So legally, when you say the land is being occupied in the West Bank area and so forth, it's not. It's legally was recognized in 1920, 21. Now, in 1937, 38, there was already an appeal for the Appeal Commission. That was to see if we could divide the small sliver that Israel still had, because the land of Israel, Palestine, quote unquote Palestine, was being, there was us, the Jewish people, and the Arabs, and we weren't living together. Not because of the people, but because of the leadership of the Arab community. The Arab community said, "It's us or nothing. We don't want to share the land with the Jewish people." So the massacres, those 3 years of riots, and my grandmother, I lost 2 children, babies, in her womb because of the fear of massacre. Okay, and the fear of of Arabs raping Jewish women. My aunt tells me in 1943, this is 5 years before Israel was even a state yet, that the Arabs were yelling when they were working with the Nazis from the south, from Africa, that we were going to come into the land of Israel and was going to rape all the Jewish women. This is my aunt tells me, and when she was a young lady in her about 21, 22. This was back in 1943, before there was a state. Not to mention, 1929, there was a terrible massacre in Hebron by Arabs against Jews. Again, the state. Again, so when people say it was Zionism and so forth, that again is a very misleading argument, a very misleading and gaslighting approach.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason why it's so gaslighting approach is because the reality, as mentioned before, that Israel had come about already with 70 years of Zionism already. Now, why am I saying before by the Holocaust? Is because of the following. When the partition plan was to be voted in 1947,
Mm-hmm.
Wednesday, November 27th,
Mm-hmm.
members of the Jewish Provisional Government who was in the UN, one was named Moshe Sheret, the other was Rabbi Avi, began to take account of how many people will vote for a Jewish state. And he realized that basically, if a vote was passed now, no one was going to, no one's going to vote really for the Jewish state, or meaning no one was going to get a majority. Petition plan would die, and the land would not be petitioned at all. Basically, there'd be no Jewish state. So Moshe Sheret, knowing very well the next day was Thanksgiving, Thursday, and the UN was not going to work, he said to his partner, Rabbi Avi, I'm going to go into filibuster, and I will talk all day long so they can't take the vote. And that will give us now 2 days to talk to people behind the scenes. And those 2 days, they were able to speak to ministers from Iberia, from the Philippines, from France, and so forth, and told them, listen, you know very well that your situation now is very, very bad because you've lost your economy after World War II. Please vote and let the Jews have also a state. And also, lo and behold, they had a state. Now, why is this so important to mention? If the world community was so concerned about the fact that 6 million Jews were massacred, ripped off the face of the earth, then the vote should have been all the nations of the UN voting for Israel, for the Jewish people.
Yeah.
It barely passed. It barely passed. 33 barely passed. Okay? And it didn't pass because of consciousness or morality. It passed because there was so to speak, deals made, as I mentioned before, that say we'll provide you with economy, we'll get people to help you with your economy, we have people who can help you with your industry and so forth. Just vote for us so we can exist. So it wasn't because of morals. More so, when it was decided, the next day, the Arabs here in Israel, land of Israel, began to attack. 1,500 Jews were massacred within those 6 months. In May 14th, when Ben-Gurion did declare the state, the next day, 6 Arab nations attacked. Nations, right? We're talking about Egypt, Jordan, we're talking about Lebanon, so forth. They attacked. Why didn't the world come in and try to save the Jews? No one came to save the Jews. No one. The Americans sent planes, and then Britain didn't send theirs, and so on and so forth. It was the Jews fighting for themselves. There were non-Jewish participants individuals who came to help the Jewish people. Few of them, true, but the majority was Jewish people themselves. So if the world was so guilt-ridden by the Holocaust, why didn't anybody participate? Basically, they were hoping to see another Holocaust. That was going to happen. Already 2.5 years earlier, 6 million Jews were destroyed, 6 million gone. And now with this war in 1948, be another 650,000 Jews wiped off the face of the earth. That's why people forget why the Arabs were no longer in the land after the War of Independence, 1948. Because, and you can document it's also this documented, because the Arab leadership told the Arabs here in the land of Israel, leave now for 2 weeks. Leave for 2 weeks. we'll wipe out the Jews. You come back and you take out the Jewish land as well, the Jewish property as well. Not a problem. So many left. Those in Haifa remained. Those in other parts of Israel remained. But half of the 1.2 million left. Now, so what happened was the great Nakba, they say the good tragedy that the Arabs mention all the time, is the fact the Jews weren't wiped off the face of the earth. That's the great Nakba. That's
Yeah,
the way the tragedy.
yeah.
It's
I
not
talked
because the
about
Jew,
it.
because
Yeah.
exactly. It's not because the Arabs were so badly beaten and we displaced them and so forth. Now, in terms of displaced, so first of all, that knocks out the argument about the Holocaust.
Mm.
Second idea is the idea of what was happening in the land of Israel at that time. Why
Well,
was
by
it a
the way,
displacement?
you know what? I have to mention that, the state-sponsored media called NHK, they talk about Nakba, being the Palestinians' catastrophe.
Yes, yes. It was a catastrophe because
Yeah,
they lost. That's
yeah.
why.
I mean,
That's
in
why.
a sense.
Hmm. Hmm. It's like, let me give an example. It's like, for example, the the rapist gets hit, right? And then he puts in jail. And then the rapist says, what a catastrophe. Why did the woman fight back? How dare the woman fought back? What a terrible thing the woman fought back. She's a
Well, that's
terrible woman.
happen. That's what's happening now.
Exactly. The man raped the woman, was raping the woman, was about to rape the woman, and she had the audacity to fight back. Right? That's what exactly happened in 1948. The Jews had the audacity to fight back, and thank God we had miracles on our side. Because who would assume that after 2,000 years, the Jews not having an army, the Jews not being trained in war, the Jews had just lost 6 million Jews, 6 million people themselves,
Mm.
would all of a sudden be able to fight against 7 Arab armies. Who would ever imagine such a thing? My father tells me when he was fighting, the army was so poorly equipped, he was carrying bullets in his pockets. His
Mm.
own machine guns stopped when he was fighting on Mount Zion. Can you imagine how the level of equipment they had? It wasn't that great, but they
Mm.
had tremendous courage, and they knew they had to win. It was now or never. And thank God, really thank God, we had great miracles, amazing miracles. So the point over here, the Nakba was because they had lost. That's the great catastrophe. No one ever think that the Jews could win. Especially, remember, the Muslims have been winning wars since the 1600, since the year 600, 619, 620. Those,
Mm.
in terms of all the conquests. And here, how a so small group of Jews who haven't fought in 2,000 years are going to be able to beat 7 Arab armies? Who would have think such a thing?
Yeah.
And so, the great catastrophe psychologically, but not in terms of being honest now. That
Mm.
the catastrophe was that, the great catastrophe was? That a genocide was prevented. That was for them a great catastrophe. Now, about a question about displacement, a very important point. Imagine this, if the Arab League and the Arab nations
Mhm.
had recognized and said, guess what? The Jews
Mm.
have been away for 2,000 years, basically, in
Mm.
terms of being a nation state, even
Mm.
though they've been living in Israel continually for 3,000 plus years,
Mm.
but they have been away in terms of having a nation state. We will live with them, they will live with us, they will have their government, we'll have our government. But according to the petition plan, no one was going to be displaced. No one was going to lose his house. No
Mm.
one was going to be picked up and moved from one village to another village. The only reason
Mm.
why the villages had to be displaced, for a simple reason, it was done for military reasons. When the Arabs were attacking and the Jews won one village, the next day the Arabs won the same village back again. So what was happening was, for every win there was a loss. And they saw that the Arabs still wanted to murder, pillage, and destroy. October 7th didn't happen October 7th. October 7th happened in 1920, 1929, it happened in 1936, 1939, and it also happened in 1948. It's been October 7th continually
Yeah,
from the Arab.
to me, October 7th, it was not the first time, for to obviously it was not the first time, but I really, really wanted to condemn, Guterres, statement,
Hmm.
because I mean, he probably does not understand the history, or I don't know what
Hmm.
what his statement is coming from, but I do not understand the definition of his Palestinians in the first place. And also,
Hmm.
there are other reasons, why I oppose his statements, but basically the United Nations members are pretty much anti-Semites.
It's true.
Sadly.
It's true. True. And that to that point, that's what I mentioned before about this displacement. The displacement that happened in 1948
Mm,
happened for one simple reason, not because of ethnic cleansing. It wasn't
mm,
because of an idea of ideology. We must kick the Arabs out. We must was there was the majority of the people who lived in 1948 were not right wing extremists who said we
yeah.
must have the whole land and kick the Arabs out. There was no racism. It was simply because of one simple reason: to defend the people from rape, pillage, and murder and genocide. So they had to displace some villages for security reasons, for life reasons, the
Mm,
same way the Japanese do it for themselves, the same way the Chinese have done for themselves. Do you know in Europe there are 65 nations that have walls on a border, and that was back in the year back 2005. You can
mm,
even probably more now. You can Google again.
mm.
They have nations have their own border walls. America has their own border wall. Why? To protect the nation. Correct.
Yeah.
Now, you see carefully. Do you know who's responsible for all the killings in Gaza and so forth? It's the UN. It's UNRWA. These
Yes.
are they're responsible. Why? Because they have been brainwashing little children from the time they were able to think, to talk, and to walk about hating Jewish people. Instead of let's assume they had to teach their children, guess
Mm,
what? The Arabs and the Jews both come from the same father, Abraham. The Arabs and the Jews have a great connection for thousands of years. The
mm,
Arabs and the Jews can make the Middle East into a beautiful place. Imagine they were taught that. Imagine the same thing as I mentioned before in 1947, 48. Instead of just having war and a partition plan, everyone would have their own particular plot, their parcel. No one would move. There would have been no killing. There would have been no displacement. There would have been no refugee problem. There would have been a Jewish state called Israel. There would have been an Arab state. I don't know what the name would have been called. I don't know if it would have been called Palestine. But the idea of a Palestinian is a very new thing in
mm,
terms of a national presence. It really started in 1964. You won't see the idea of Pat in terms of calling us Arabs calling themselves Palestinian.
mm,
There was Palestine. I mentioned before there was Arabs of Palestine, Jews of Palestine. But in terms of nationalism, it probably began, and it began when the Jews returned back to Israel. So the Arabs saw themselves, okay, if it's a Jewish Renaissance, what
mm,
they call it Zionism, also some type of also as an Arab Renaissance in terms of those living in Palestine. But you really won't see in terms of Palestinian itself, in terms of the culture that people say. And you can also, if anybody wants to, they can go to YouTube videos and
mm,
they can see these videos where they ask Arabs themselves living in Gaza, living in West Bank, Ramallah, and so forth, tell us about your history.
mm,
Who was a famous person before Arafat, the head of the PLO? And they can't name one. Interesting. They get tongue-tied. How's it possible? I mean, any Japanese person can tell the history of what happened from the Bushidos and Earl and so forth, and the samurais, and before that, and from the last 3,000 years of Japanese culture,
mm,
correct? But they can't tell. They can mention about Islam, they can mention about Muhammad, yes, but they can't mention about the Palestinian history. As opposed to the Jewish people, we can tell you every place we were, where you have been, where the situations. We have historical data. We have archaeology and so forth. Cannot be denied. In fact, let me give an example. If anybody was in Rome, they go to the Arch of Titus or Titus. The Arch of Titus is an arch, and
mm,
on it is a sculpture, so to speak, a rendering
mm,
made by the brother of Titus. Titus was the conqueror and destroyer of the Second Holy Temple.
mm,
On that wall of Titus, which was created basically in 89 CE, you'll see there Jewish slaves being walking into Rome, carrying the menorah from the Holy Temple and so forth, and artifacts from the temple. That is a snapshot of what happened 2,000 years ago. You don't see Titus Arabs, you don't see Samaritans, you see Jews. So they themselves are an eyewitness. The Romans, who were the arch enemies of the Jewish people, saying, you know who was living here 2,000 years ago? The Jews. And in fact, why do they call us Jew? Why don't they call us Yisachar or Zvalun and so forth? And why I mention these names? Because remember, there are 12 tribes. A name of the tribe, one of the tribes is called Levi. Another tribe is called Reuben. Another tribe is called Dan. Another tribe is called Yisachar. One is called Zvulun and so forth. No, we're called Jew. Because why? We come from Judea, from Judah. That's why. The other 10 tribes that I mentioned before earlier in the podcast, they had been already exiled 700 years earlier by Sennacherib in for the Syrian conquest. They were already then they were already as Babylonians and so forth. They were exiled. So the point over here is that the fact that for 2,000 years everyone that is Jewish is called Jew is already a testimony to the fact Jews come from Judea. The same way, why are people called Arabs Arabs? Because they come from Arabia. They don't come from India. They don't come from Iran. They don't come from Libya. They don't come from Syria. They come from Arabia. So how's it possible if people from Arabia are called Arabs if they're living in the land of Israel? Because they were part of the colonialist immigration conquest that was started by the Muslims from Arabia, and then Muhammad and so forth. That's what the expansion, the colonialism. That's when you see so many states in the Middle East and also Europe too, like you mentioned before, speaking Arabic. And I'm not talking about now the Arabic that's been done in the last 30 years or 50 years because of immigration. I'm talking about conquest. Why was Spain was Arab for a while? Because they were conquered by the Arabs, right? And then Christians came in, they fought back. Historically, there was already 1,000 years ago, there was a fight between Christians and Arabs, and Christian Muslims for Spain. And to this day, the Arabs are hoping to come back to Spain again, to reconquer the caliphate. But again, if people don't research the history, they won't know these things. And they'll think that.
Well, it's pretty sad. And, especially, I really don't have words on what's going on, what's being stated by the Japanese media. Because, like, for example, TBS has invited the former Japanese terrorist.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, and, I have thought over the years on why they do that,
Mm-hmm.
but, at the same time, I mean, this is going to be a serious problem in the future, probably. And I think
Yes.
most probably this is going to be a very, very serious problem. But, the media is very irresponsible all the time. This is not the first time it happened.
Right.
To the Japanese, this is not about just about, somewhere in the Middle East, called Israel, and, Palestinians, this, thing is happening, blah, 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 all these things. But in the end,
Mm-hmm.
uh, China, and, for example,
Yeah. Yeah.
Japan has, well, claimed themselves to be the peaceful nation of 50, 80 years. But,
Yeah.
I have to say that, if you don't know about the diplomatic history, probably you would say so. But if you know about
Right.
the diplomatic history of Japan and the United States, probably you would never say that,
Right.
because
Let me,
Japan
if
has
I,
always had a lot
yes.
to do with any wars. that happened
Right.
after
Correct.
1945. And,
Correct.
you know, and right now, China, J Japan is screwing up themselves with China right now. It's
Yeah.
not because of the United States, but it's because of Japan itself.
Right.
And Taiwan, for example, like now,
Mm-hmm.
like, some people say, well, Taiwan's matter is a matter of Japan. But
Mm-hmm.
China, CCP China, PRC is defining Okinawa as a part of China.
Mm-hmm.
And what happens is that, like realistically, the trajectory of, all the cruise missiles, flying towards Taiwan, they're on the way, they're in between, well, this Okinawan islands are in between Taiwan and, China, the mainland China. And
Mm-hmm.
obviously they're going to have some ambition to take the southern part of Japan. And they're
Yes.
always around all the time. I mean, the
Mm-hmm.
Coast Guards are, trying to I have to say, just tell the Chinese Coast Guards to go away, but it will not last,
Mm-hmm.
probably, this will work for another couple of years or whatever. But, I don't want to admit at some point, but I have to say that this urgency, the people, those people want to name Taiwanese urgency. That's actually the urgency of Japan.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of I guess that people like condemn, for example, the military operation in Gaza
Yeah.
right now. But you know, from the time of October 7th, I think that it was a very, very hard choice for Israeli people or the Israeli government, or I don't know what it is. But, I'm not going to talk about the Israeli politics, but ultimately, this was a very hard decision because um, ultimately Hamas or had been a problem, before October 7th. And,
Mm-hmm.
after October 7th, it became obvious. And,
Yeah.
it was obvious that it was necessary to get rid of this military wing that exists, there right now. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
and so I mean, if, the Japanese would say, well, we have been a peaceful nation. We should not, amend the Constitution. I was rather on the side, I was undecided about this, amendment of the Constitution because, it was possible for Japan to counterattack against, any military invasion in case of emergency, really,
Yeah.
because of US-Japan alliance. But
Mm-hmm.
um, now we cannot, Japan cannot ask the United States to fight for Japan. Obviously, in case of this urgency, to have Okinawa being half of Okinawa taken away by China, for example.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's, just we cannot ask the United States to, defend itself. That's not a
Mm-hmm.
part of the United States. But, I think that well, from the level of population, or, looking at, the level of, I have to say, the reservists, you know,
Yeah.
realistically, it's impossible to fight against the Chinese military with
Mm-hmm.
only with the reservists. And then, what
Right.
happens is that what happens with probably with the military draft after the amendment of the Constitution.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
Right.
this is, see, a lot of Japanese people think that, this right-wing government, for example, like, all these things, like that's said, among like Harats, blah, 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 all these things are crazy. But realistically, if half of Japan, for example, okay, like from the northern part, there may be invasion from Russia. And then, there may be invasion from North Korea. And there is an invasion, obviously. There has been invasion from China. And
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if we cannot defend itself, we're going to lose the nation. And that's what Israel has been facing for 80 years, for now.
Yes,
And then,
right.
I think that the media outlets, basically are mistaken in how they broadcast, or how they understand Israel as a nation. Well, in the first place, it seems like, it's the same as the Al Jazeera perspective,
Mm-hmm.
Israel doesn't exist. And,
Right.
otherwise, it was a part of Arab nation. That was
Mm-hmm.
some kind of like the narrative that they had.
Right.
Or, you know, they want to, give impression among the public that, you know, uh, like Israel was built by the Europeans. Like,
Yeah.
it's wrong. I mean,
Totally wrong.
at the same
Completely wrong.
time, and the same and at the same time, like considering the concept of the nation, the modern nation state, this ideology of who was older or who was older than the Jewish state was older. Because it has existed 3,000 years ago. That was the oldest nation that has existed. Okay. So we cannot win against that, win that discussion. And at the same time, um, not recognizing the Jewish state is, I think, anti-Semitism itself, really.
Sure. Sure.
So I mean, and at the same time, Japan has to think of its future. We cannot keep on saying with some kind of diplomatic approach, it is possible to avoid. You know,
Yeah.
it's a sad part of history, but
Right.
sometimes it is not possible. you
Right.
know. And I will not say it's 100% impossible, but condemning Israel at the same time, now, especially the military operation, I do not think that it is, I have to say, probably they don't understand the situation. Or they do
Sure.
not understand what Hamas is, right? Because, okay, so um, what do you think Hamas should, in the end happen? I mean, what should happen to Hamas, I have to say.
Yeah. See, the difference is, let me give you an example. There's a famous story in the book of Esther
Hmm.
when Esther says to Ahasuerus, the head of Persia, you know, if they were going to make my people into slaves, I wouldn't protest. But Haman, the evil person, the villain in the story, he
Mm,
doesn't want to make my people into slaves. He
mm,
wants to destroy every man, woman, and child. That's why I have to speak up. Okay? So the question is, why all of a sudden Israel took this tremendous, drastic action after October 7th? We didn't do this in 2014 when Hamas attacked us. We didn't do this in 2009 when Hamas attacked us,
mm,
but now we did. What was the cause that all of a sudden Jews around the world, young Jews, men and adults, people my age and so forth, decide, guess what? We have to go, we have to participate now. I myself joined the Israel police and began to protect to try to protect our city and so forth, our villages and so from terrorists. And please remind me about that, because I think one of the questions about it is an apartheid in Israel. I think what's your question? One you can
Yes,
talk
yes,
about.
exactly. Yeah.
So that's a very important side to the question we have to address. What happened was, all of a sudden, Hamas, it wasn't anymore, quote unquote, freedom fighters, or they're fighting for their rights to have, to return back to their original homes, quote unquote, to be Tel Aviv, or to Haifa, and so forth. It's
Mhm.
different. They had gotten into 28 different or 29 different villages, and they went into this very area of settlements of left-wing extreme pacifists.
Mm.
The same pacifists would go into Gaza and bring Gazans to Jewish hospitals, Jewish medical help, and so forth.
Mhm.
And all of a sudden, what did these Gazans do? "Quote unquote" peace-loving Gazans. They came and they mutilated and they raped and they burned to death savagely men, women, children, families.
60,000 people
Mhm.
poured into Israel, right?
Exactly. 1,020, even say, they even pick more, 2,000 terrorists came into Israel.
Mhm.
Now, let's think about this for a second. People say, well, what about when Israel throws bombs and it burns people alive?
Mm.
Big difference. When a bomb is dropped, correct? It's
Mhm.
instantaneous.
Mm.
When you take a match and you torture a family, and then you burn the children in front of the mother and the father,
Mm.
slowly, deliberately, that's cruel and human punishment. That's torture. What happens, let's say, when the Israeli bomb is thrown? It's because why? Because UNRWA and the UN did not stop Hamas. They helped fund Hamas, knowing Hamas very well, builds tunnels under civilians, builds next to babies,
Mm.
builds next in mosques, puts weapons there, and then not only that, not only they put them, but they invite, so to speak, a counterattack. So let me ask you a question, moral question now. Suppose you see an ambulance,
Mm.
right? A terrorist comes in the ambulance and he grabs a patient,
Mm.
and he grabs the patient, he shoots from the ambulance everybody on the street.
Mm.
What are you going to say? Well, completely moral good, I can't fight back, because if I can't fight back, I may be killing the patient in the ambulance,
Mm.
right? An innocent person. Or everybody around the neighborhood also get killed, massacred. So it's a moral choice. So Hamas knows that very well. And Hamas is using that in terms of PR. So I have been to funerals
Mm.
where parents have to bury their dead children, soldiers, because the Israeli soldier, the Jewish soldier, and also the non-Jewish Jewish soldier, because in Israel we have Druze and Muslims
Mm.
and Christians in the Israeli army,
Yeah.
that many times, rather than have a Gazan baby get killed, they were hesitant and they let themselves be killed rather than killed. Can you imagine to that level of moral sensitivity is the Israeli soldier?
Mm.
And I've been to these funerals, as opposed to Hamas, who has no consideration for human life.
Mm.
Hamas is a death cult, and to such an extent that once someone was interviewed and said, "What about the fact that you know very well that there's a policy that if someone makes an act of terror against Israel, the family of the terrorist, that family's house is destroyed. Isn't that the deterrent for you?" And he said, "No, not at all. Because if their house gets destroyed, I know they're going to have a higher place in heaven." You're dealing with people whose whole psychology is basically die is holy, to kill is holy, and in fact, just the opposite. You're letting me become holy by letting me kill and be killed. Okay? Now, what happens over here, the question of is the fourth. if UNRWA and UN knows what Hamas is doing and they don't stop it, then all the deaths in Gaza are on their heads, not Israel's heads, on their heads. So what happened was, what Hamas did was they crossed the line, the red line. The red line was, we're not fighting you militarily now. We're fighting you in terms of barbarism. We're going to burn the babies, kill the babies, rape the women, and so forth. That was no longer any more legitimate war. It wasn't freedom fighting. It wasn't resistance anymore. Because if it was resistance, first of all, Gaza was already given to the Gazans in the year 2005. We left it in 2005. Gave it over to the Gazans. They had it for themselves. The PLO was in charge. Then the PLO had to fight against Hamas, and Hamas took over. And Hamas then began to throw bombs and shoot bombs and missiles against Israel. That's when we had to, so to speak, start controlling what was in and going out and going in, because self-protection, not because we wanted to control Gaza. Again, anybody wants to, they can look at videos from Gaza before what happened in 2007. And you'll see inner Gaza was very nice. I can even send you this video. So you can see it was very rich and so forth. What you see sometimes was the Gaza for the PR. That's what you see. And this is very clever design. Brilliant. You'll see Gaza poor. The same way right now, I can right now go into any city, I'm sure, in America, and some cities in Israel, and some cities in Japan, and I can take pictures of homeless people, correct? And I can say, this is Japan. Look at Japan. Japan is terrible. Japan is poor. Japan doesn't care about its elderly. Japan doesn't care about its poor and so forth. I can do that. Anybody can do that. That's called the power of editing.
Yeah, but
So
more than that, UNRWA has been using, photos from Syria or Yemen.
yes. But again, people don't do research, right?
Yeah.
People don't go to Google. You remind me for a second, the head of BDS. BDS was a movement created by Umar Bagati. It means boycott the best sanction. He was the one who started. He the one who took anti-Semitism and made it into a global phenomenon. And he once said, I can use all the trigger words in the world. I can use colonialism and freedom fighting and so forth, because why? I know people won't check my facts. People don't check facts. Simple as that. You can tell me 90% of people don't check anything. They take it face value. That's why gossiping is such a terrible, terrible sin. Why is the gossiping such a terrible sin? Because when someone gossips and the other person believes it, without doing his or her homework, they're also part of the sin. Because you are now accepting false information. You're not being first we should say, I don't want to listen to gossip, first of all. But if you're going to listen to information, be a true judge and listen to all the sides. Like you see, for example, there's a family matter, and you see one person find another person in the family, or friends and so forth, and you only take one side. Why don't you be a good judge? Why don't you be a true person and ask both sides? And then you can come to a conclusion. But going back to your question about what happened was in October 7th. At October 7th, all of a sudden, the fire was lit. From this point on, you didn't just fight. You came in, you raped our women. You massacred our elderly. You destroyed and burned people to death alive. And then you took hostages. Done deal. Now, no one in their right moral mind, not the Japanese, not the Chinese, and not the Arabs, no one would allow that. We know very well if you come to someone's territory, you take their women, you massacre them, rape them, and so forth, in front of the children, and so forth, then it's the obligation of that particular nation state or that town or that area to fight for the honor, first of all, of the people, to protect the women, protect the children, and so forth, and make sure it doesn't happen again. The reason why with Hamas is so different, because Hamas has vowed over and over again, they said they will do October 7th again and again and again. It has nothing to do with politics. It has to do with massive, unlimited genocide in the most brutal form. That's why Hamas has to be stopped. And Japan wouldn't do such a thing. You know very well Japan would have. If Japan was attacked by China and the Chinese said, listen, we'll fight you man to man, so to speak, maybe Japan would say, okay, But no, if China came in and started raping the women of Japan, what would happen then? What would happen then? Okay, we know very well what the Japanese would do. All of a sudden, the warrior spirit would come out. If it happened to the Koreans, what would come out? Right? If it happened to the French, what would come out? And the Jews don't have the right to do that. We're protecting our women, we're protecting our elderly, we're protecting our very existence. It's not a war anymore. October 7th became a point at the cross the red line of humanity. And the worst part was the world community. When I saw women in Europe tearing down posters of babies, and they said, it's resistance, the world has lost its mind. Because women are not being women anymore. A woman's natural instinct is to what? To have mercy on a baby. That's natural. That's a natural instinct of women. I don't care who you are and what you are, but they didn't have that instinct. So what does it show you already? It means that they were so brainwashed by Al Jazeera, by BDS, by all this media that you are allowed to hate the Jew. You're allowed to hate the Jew, and that's what your point before, anti-Zionism. Anti-Zionism is really anti-Semitism. You're not allowing the Jewish person, the Jewish man, woman, child, to have their own country. That's not because you are against, so to speak, nationalism. No, because you're against simple existence of Jews. You don't want Jews to have rights. You want Jews to flourish. That's anti-Semitism. And you will say I'm anti-Zionist. So let's assume now there was no Zionism. Okay, so what are you basically saying? You're saying you don't want a state, the Jewish state. That's what you're saying. So be honest now. They say, God in Torah says, he says, I don't like a weasel. I don't like a snake. If you hate, you hate. You love. But don't be a weasel. The worst possible person is a person who manipulates, who gaslights, who doesn't have the honor to say, I don't like you, or I do like you. But don't smile and then put a knife in the back. That's a hypocrite. And God hates that. God hates that very much. Hypocrisy is a terrible, terrible sin. Be honest. You don't like Jews, you don't like Jews. Simple as that. Yesterday, I was so surprised to see that on YouTube of 1934 speech by Hitler in the last 11 years has gotten 82 million views. 82 million views by Hitler. And another speech he made the last year got 1.5 million views, saying about the Jews and so forth. So what does that mean? The viewers on YouTube are watching anti-Semitism. They're watching Hitler and they're viewing it. And they're saying, look at that. Wow. What is it telling you? Has anything to do about Israel? Why are Jews being attacked in California? Why are Jews being attacked in Europe and so forth? Are these Israelis? Are they fighting in Gaza?
Well, see, ultimately, I do not believe that it's just about Israel that they are doing, really.
Mm-hmm. They don't see exactly. They don't want the Jews to have a state. They want let's assume this way. If let's say Israel was not in the Middle East, would they still allow to have the Jews a state?
I do not believe so.
We don't know, but I believe no. We don't believe no. They wouldn't, but they'll take everything from the Jews. They'll take our morals, they'll take our ethics, they'll take our Nobel Prizes, they'll take our chemistry, they'll take our physics, they'll take our technology and so forth. But they don't want the Jews themselves. This goes back to a very simple statement that Hitler said himself back in the 1940s and 30s. He said, the reason why we don't want the Jews, because the Jews brought conscience to the world. And one of the reasons people are so happy, so to speak, with Gaza, you know why? Because for the last 80 years, we the Jews have been telling the world, you saw the Holocaust, and he didn't stop it. He didn't stop the Holocaust. So quote unquote, now there's happening a genocide. Everybody knows very well it's not a genocide, because genocide means destroying everyone in the area. The fact is, there's so many Palestinians, there's so many people in Gaza. The fact is, there's a commander, an American commander, who went and made a survey, and he said there's more people growing, more births in Gaza. How could it be? Because it's fiction in terms. The fact is that in 1948, you had 1.2 million Palestinians, and now you have over 13 million Palestinians around the world, and Israel and Gaza and so forth. How can that be? So where's the genocide? But you see now, quote unquote, Jews are killing. They don't explain why this is happening. So they say, you see, the Jews are just as bad as we are. So they can't even take the high ground anymore. They can't blame us for the Holocaust. They've been waiting for this for 80 years. That's another reason. Simple psychological reason. We say, you're just as bad as we. So now we can comfort ourselves, and you can't blame us that we didn't protect you in 1945, 1944, 1943, and so forth.
Mm.
It's a guilt trip that they said now it's over with. And people don't want to admit that. It comes down to basically human nature. Maybe people won't like my explanation, but it's the truth. Because why? Bottom line, it's all about humanity, human beings, and how they perceive each other, and how they perceive reality. And they perceive it through human emotions. Because if they're really truthful, they would have stopped Hamas years ago. If they're really truthful, they would see that Israel does its best to always warn before they drop any bombs. They call people up and so forth. No army does that. That is the stupidest thing to do militarily. If you're going to attack me, and then I call you Hana, by the way, I'm going to attack you in 5 minutes, so please get out of the house. Is that smart of me militarily? Not at all. But Israel does that, knowing very well that they're telling the enemy where they're going to be in 5 minutes, which is putting themselves in risk, and also giving them a chance to run away. So where is the brilliance in that? It only because we are a moral army. But again, not given credit for that. We're gaslit, we are misrepresented, we are defamed. We are thrown under the bus continually. And that is the world's problem.
Yeah, by the way, I believe that French President Macron, he has a problem. I think, he has a problem in many ways, like, for example, well, inviting us the Syrian new president. Well, let's put it aside, but I would say recognizing the Palestinian state. Probably he's talking out of his profit or something, or interest, but I do not believe that it's out of his conscience.
No, of course not. Of course not. If people had conscience, real conscience, then they would simply say the truth, see the fact the Jews have been here for over 3,000 plus years. The Jews have contributed to the world more than any other nation in the history of the world. The Jews have done it against the most incredible odds. The Jews have constantly, so to speak, turned the other cheek for 3,000 plus years. The Jews are the one to introduce the world love the neighbor as thyself, ethics, morals, conscience, and so forth. The Jews have done this,
right? Peace loving.
Peace loving, so forth. We always say to l'chaim, to give life, to life, to life, to life, to life.
Yeah.
The amount of tragedies that we've gone through, and the amount of oppression and abuse and genocide and so forth, we are not bitter. Think about that. We still help our enemies. We help the Germans. We help the Spanish. We help other people who've been cruel to us. We could keep our technology to ourselves. We can keep our know-how to ourselves. But we share and share and share, even though we were abused and thrown into the pits of hell, because we are a noble people. We are a moral people. We take the high road, not the low road. We want to, and that's what Zionism is all about. It's about taking people and having them reach their highest potential. That's to come before we're talking about joining the Israeli police. In Israeli police, you know who my commanders are? Muslims. Muslims are my commanders. Druze, D-R-U-Z-E, they are another minority group in Israel. They are my commanders. Christians, my commanders. Can you imagine? I'm a rabbi. Israel is my country, right? It's a Jewish state. And my commanders are either Muslim or they're Druze or they're Christians, and they tell me what to do, how to do what they do this, do that, and so forth. They're giving me commanding officers. And not only giving me office, not only giving me commanding orders, not only giving me commanding orders, not only that, but they also tell me, how to what to do in terms of this particular movement or that particular action, so forth. So much so that we're thinking about this. We're giving Arabs, Muslims, Druze, Christians, the authority, the guns, the M5s, the Jericho hand pistols, and so forth. So in my community, the police force is basically half Arab, and in many parts of the country. Why an apartheid state would give to the so to speak the minority people, quote unquote, the majority, you want to call it, because part of the basic what's apartheid? It was the minority controls the majority. That's what apartheid is. Why would it give them all the weapons unless we're not in apartheid?
No.
That's exactly it. And I challenge anyone in Japan, in China, in the United States, in Europe, in the Muslim world, to come to Israel, see for yourself. Don't go by Al Jazeera. If you're really a person of intelligence, you're really a person of honesty, intellectual honesty, a person of morals and ethics and justice, or a person of high religious standing, come for yourself, judge for yourself. Don't rely on
I think
on
that's
edited
very
pieces.
important. Yeah. That's very important, I think, for people to do it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. But anyway, I guess that the time is coming up. So
Yes.
I would like to post relevant articles that you have written, and also, some of the, video clips that I can post, about you. So but anyway, thank you very much for, speaking a lot about, various topics that I asked for. You know,
My pleasure. Thank you.
it
It's an
was a
honor and
lot,
pleasure.
but I really hope that, you just come back maybe another time or something with the other
My
topics.
pleasure. My pleasure.
But anyway, thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye bye.
Bye.